You're someone with a vision for your practice, for your side hustle, and for your personal journey. But when it comes to establishing your path on how to get to where you want to be with your practice, things get a little messy. You're also someone who'd prefer to go in person instead of to groups and listening to everyone else's story. To me, it sounds like you could benefit from one-on-one consulting with our experienced practice of the practice consultants. From $5.95 a month and up, you can work with a consultant that will give you more direction and practical tried and tested tips matched to you and your goals. For more information, visit practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/apply. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1285. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice you absolutely love. We want both sides of it. We want you to thrive, to understand the operations, the marketing, the website, SEO, all that goes into thriving, but we also want you to love it. We want you to have the clinical side where you feel like the clients you're attracting and that you're working with are the exact clients you want to work with. As you grow your group practice and maybe step back from as much clinical work, that the team you're building is the exact team that you want to serve your community. So we want to help you with all of that stuff we didn't learn in grad school. And I'm so excited today to have Bryan Power with me. Bryan is a relationship coach and writer who helps individuals and couples heal through the lens of integrated attachment theory. After facing a breaking point in his own marriage, Bryan embarked on an intense journey of self-work that transformed not only his relationship, but his understanding of love, masculinity, and emotional growth. Bryan, welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast.
Joe, thanks so much for having me, man. You have a lot of great guests on this show, and truly honored that you would allow me to share my story today. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this. Now, you've said that you had a rough patch in your marriage. Let's just start there.
We're jumping right into this thing. All right.
Well, we're therapists here.
Yeah. So my wife and I, thought we had a pretty good relationship. We had been together almost 8.5 years in 2019. 2024. My son was born in 2019. I have a stepdaughter from her first marriage. She was about 13 at that time. So my son was about 4.5. And in early 2024, we would start having some really crazy emotional, collision, if you will. Like we went from having what I thought was a pretty good relationship. There was no major drug issues, no major financial issues, no infidelity, stuff like that. That would really warrant, a real breakup. We had a lot of fun together, had a lot of love. We did love each other. But we'd have those typical issues where we just didn't know how to work through some fighting and stuff like that. But in early 2024, we had a little fight about my son again, some parenting styles. And she would actually challenge me to see a therapist when we had that fight. And I said, okay, fair enough. You know what? I'm willing to see what I can do and see if I can learn something here. But I want you to also see a therapist. And because, in my mind, she was the one with all the issues, right? And in her mind, I was the one with all the issues. And so the first thing I learned about a lot of this stuff is we have to learn about our own issues and how we're showing up. And we have to take ownership for that and start to, look at ourselves and see what are we doing wrong in relationships that really can, are really helping to cause the problem in that relationship. Are we not listening properly? Are we just acting in certain ways that are really unbecoming, that are causing our spouses to, do certain things as well? And the combination, between the two of us really just became we just delved from what I thought was a pretty good relationship into really emotional turmoil. And what I learned was a lot of that had to do with our childhood, our trauma, our subconscious thoughts and behaviors that were kind of playing out, and how powerful the subconscious really is. And that really drove that, train, if you will, into a train wreck. And then about 4 months into that, she would actually put a restraining order against me for emotional safety. It was never any violent threats. I never threatened my wife with physical harm, but it became so emotionally tumultuous that she finally just said, I can't do this anymore. She reached for the law, if you will, and put the restraining order against me. And that would really kind of set in my mind that it was over. I was kind of done at that point. I didn't know how to fix this. I was kind of just, over and done, exhausted. But and my first inclination was to run back to Florida, which is where I'm from. But I had a friend of mine who I happened to get lucky. I was on the phone with him, and he said, what are you thinking about? He says, my father abandoned me. He said, your father abandoned you. He said, look how much we're dealing with our adult lives because of that abandonment and stuff. He says, you can't leave your son there. And I said, you're right. And I knew I was stuck at that point. I was going to have to do everything I could to stay in Massachusetts to make sure that I stayed with my son and could be as much of a father to him as possible. And it didn't matter what I had to do. I was just willing to sleep on the street if I had to. That was the first thing I realized, is that I had to really humble myself and be willing to do whatever it took to turn this thing around. And a very tough experience for sure. But a lot of awarenesses would come over the next few months. A lot of.
I want to pause before you get
please.
The outcomes of it. So tell me about the rebuilding, because to have a restraining order, and that's a really big deal for someone to feel like it's at that level for emotional safety. What kind of conversations did you guys have? What kind of actions did she need to see change in you that you needed to see in her collectively? Like, what did that rebuilding look like?
Well, the rebuilding took some time because with the restraining order, it took a few months. It was about 4.5 months before we even got to talk again, really. And, but luckily for her, she was still continuing to see her therapist, who was a childhood trauma specialist. She was really helping her get into her childhood trauma and began to really heal. And my wife did a lot of healing, great healing that was about 8.5 months from the start when she started to see the therapist, until we finally did reconnect a little bit. So she was seeing childhood trauma specialists. I was also seeing my therapist as well, along with learning what's called integrated attachment theory, which also delved into a lot of, subconscious wounds and started to learn how to kind of have different relationship skills that ultimately, I started to realize, wow, I'm definitely showing up in the ways that I didn't want to show up, learning how to listen differently and learning how to communicate differently and learning, how the behaviors and how the subconscious was working. Really just kind of opened our eyes. I think at the end of that 4.5 months with the restraining order, we had learned so much and had so much new awarenesses that we were both excited to see if we could put this thing back together. We had no idea, right? We were still hopeful, but also still concerned and nervous about, are we able to do this? But I think very quickly we saw it was different. My wife was very much in tune with my needs, being able to, match me and kind of help me through my needs. I like a lot of affection, a lot of connection and stuff, and she was able to start really connecting better. She really processes differently. She likes a lot of space. Sometimes she needs that space to kind of work through things and stuff. And so in the past, if I was, she wanted that space, I'd sometimes have a hard time giving that to her, right? So understanding that that's what she needs, that's how she processes, and it didn't have to personalize it and internalize it for me, allows me to give her that space a little bit more. Her also.
Do you think part of that was the just like attachment wound with your dad, like that felt like abandoning when she needed her own space?
Oh yeah. A lot of that goes back to the childhood wounds. Abandonment is a big one for me because of my father being in and out of my childhood. I have a very severe abandonment issue, fear of being alone, fear of being not good enough. A lot of these other subconscious wounds that play out, but the abandonment one is a huge one for me for sure.
And how did the integrated attachment theory help? How did that framework help make a difference in that area for you?
Oh man, with the attachment, because first and foremost, the attachments, integrated attachment theory works off of 6 core, core elements, if you will, and that is number 1, the core wounds. It is beginning to work on those core wounds, understanding what they are, and then beginning to heal those. Number 2, it's our needs. Number 3, it's our emotions. Number 4, it's boundaries, learning how to set boundaries, enforce boundaries. Number 5 is communication. That's a huge one, learning how to communicate differently in a better way. And number 6 is our behaviors. When I started looking at all those 6 different things, I realized how much I lacked in a lot of those areas and really needed some work on those things. And so, but when it comes back to the core wounds, that really helped me see how I was behaving with my attachment style because of my core wounds of mostly, again, abandonment issues, fear of being alone and stuff. I was acting more in what's called an anxious, preoccupied type of manner where connection is very important, sometimes too much, where we can kind of become almost codependent, if you will, in a negative way. So, but that was absolutely showing up in the way I was, in my relationship because of the core wounds for sure.
Now, maybe talk through a little bit more of that attachment style. How do you see those showing up differently or similarly between men and women? And maybe gender isn't the biggest divider. Maybe it's if people have trauma, if people have attachment wounds, how does that show up differently between people, whether that's gender or trauma history or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, so if, in case somebody doesn't, I mean, some of you guys, I'm sure know, but the 4 different attachment styles, your secure attachment style, that somebody really has the balance, right? They really know how to communicate well. They're emotionally balanced. They kind of handle everything pretty good. That's the one we all want to get to, but unfortunately, we all, most of us are going to fall into one of the other three categories, which is more of like an anxious, preoccupied. That's somebody like myself who really craves that relationship, really loves connection, really kind of outgoing, fun, but sometimes puts too much stock in the idea of connection, and that is a lot because of those wounds of abandonment and stuff. Then you have on the other side of that, like dismissive avoidance, where they love a lot of space. They like my wife was kind of being more dismissive, right? She craves a lot of space, really fears a lot of being trapped or commitments and stuff. So that's really something for them that really is a struggle. They have a harder time connecting to their emotions, and even if they do, they process them very much alone, and so they have a hard time actually coming together. And a lot of times, anxious, preoccupied, and dismissive will actually attract each other because that's that kind of the other side of them that they're missing, if you will. In between, there's that fearful avoidant, where that fearful avoidant really swings between both sides. Sometimes they're acting on that anxious side, and they're really kind of connecting, and then because of their own core wounds, sometimes the next week they're all of a sudden out of the blue breaking up with you or causing problems, or lack of trust becomes a big thing for them. So they may just fear the trust issue becomes something, and now they're causing problems where there really shouldn't be. And so it just becomes extremely dysfunctional. And until you really learn kind of what's going on there with these things, it really just causes us to go from having loving relationships where we want to love each other. We want those things. We want good, healthy relationships, but these core wounds start driving the train into a train wreck. And all of a sudden we wake up one day and go, what happened to our relationship? What happened to that love we once had? What happened to the dreams that we once shared? And how did we get to this point where everything's such a mess? But again, a lot of these things come through the subconscious because of our own just wounds that we've developed, mostly through childhood, but they can develop in adult life too. But a lot of it is childhood based, and then we just take these into our adult lives, and they just no longer serve us. And they're actually destroying our relationships tremendously.
Mm-hmm. Now, at the time of this recording, we're probably a year and a half, kind of from when all that happened. Take us through, like, what did you do for yourself to like start to maybe admit when you were hurting or scared, or to find more balance, or to show up differently in the relationship, maybe is what I'm asking.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of it is first the awareness of just realizing how much, was actually driving the train, and how much my core wounds were showing up. And once I started to realize that, I started to accept, like, okay, wait a second. I know that these are lies. These are just falsities. That's not true, right? So I started to work on those. And there's some exercises you can do with the Integrated Attachment Theory program that allows us to begin to reprogram those a little bit. Going through a little workbook, understanding my needs a little bit better, learning how to fill my needs more on my own, really not looking to outsource my needs, learning how to be happy and fulfilled from myself. So I don't need a lot of other outside sources to kind of fill that bucket, if you will. That's huge. My emotions, just accepting my emotions more, and using the emotions more as the information, right? Emotions are really not a bad thing. It's really just, what are the emotions telling me? What are the thoughts behind that are causing me to feel that heightened emotional state? And is it true? That's the question. Is it really valid, right? Is that fear valid here? Is that emotion and that thought really, as I trace it back, is that a true thought? And then when I realize it's not, then I can begin to say, okay, well, let's break that down and let's not go there. Let's start to, develop some different patterns. Boundaries, learning how to just say, hey, this is what I really need in my life, and trying to be able to communicate those a little bit better. So that just really kind of becomes a thing where I'm really protecting my life and myself, and how I kind of want people to treat me, if you will. And then communication was a huge one. I feel like my wife and I learned how to communicate differently. The first thing I learned is, in the past, when my wife would communicate with me, I was always listening to defend. Right. And so I was always listening, and I was jumping on top of her, trying to tell her why she was wrong and this is not true and all that stuff. And that was really not a great communication way. Right. It was breaking us down, and nobody felt listened to. Nobody felt heard or understood. We stopped that. I don't do that anymore. We actually listen to each other. I'll let her speak for 5 or 10 minutes without me interrupting, and then she gets to go, or then I get to go, right? And so we do this where we kind of hold space for each other, really actually listen to learn and understand, and try to hear this woman, because I love her, right? I want to understand her, so I really want to listen to understand, not just listen to defend. And again, that defense stuff was coming from core wounds, really, but again, really great tools on how to communicate differently. And then last but not least, just changing my overall behaviors, continue to work on those. Learning how to, again, control the emotions. If I do get a little emotional, maybe not, maybe not doing something negative. Now I can say, okay, wait a second. I'm feeling a little bit, triggered. I'm going to go for a walk. Hey, I'm going to head out the door, put my sneakers on, and maybe just go for an hour walk. And by the time I come back in the house, I'm feeling pretty good by then. I'm feeling pretty regulated. And that makes a huge difference. And when I started to work on all 6 of those things, it's made a huge difference in how we do our lives together, how we kind of interact with each other. And it's just been a game changer as far as really when I look back at what we had before, which I thought was a pretty good relationship compared to what we have today. It's almost night and day where this is a really a totally different way of doing things that I never even dreamed about before all this really kind of happened, you know?
Mm. I want to thank Headway for sponsoring this episode. If you run a group practice, you know that accepting insurance can be overwhelming. Between credentialing, billing, and payroll, the admin side can easily take over your week. Headway was built to help you handle this, and they're the only platform designed specifically for in-network group practices. Whether you're growing your team or running an established practice, Headway makes the business side easier with faster credentialing, higher per-session rates, and bi-weekly payments your team can count on. They work with therapy, psychiatric, and hybrid group practices. There are no subscription fees, just the support you need to run your practice with ease. Run your best group practice with Headway, trusted by thousands of group practice leaders to simplify insurance admin and reach more people through in-network care. Curious how Headway can work for you? Head to join.headway.co/Joe. That's join.headway.co/Joe to learn more. Now, tell me kind of big picture, if we kind of zoom out and look at just masculinity, like what do you think needs to change in regards to how men, look at their emotions and talk about emotional frameworks and the role models they choose and how they interact with the women in their lives? What do you think needs to shift?
Man, yeah, that's a great question. And, again, I kind of grew up without a father for the most part. My father really battled addiction. And so I didn't get to really see that. I didn't get to really understand what a man was and how to be able to look up to him and say, okay, that's what I want to be like, And so I kind of floated through the world, because of the abandonment wounds and all the issues I grew up with there. I really struggled to get in tune with my emotions and really begin to heal those and get through them, right? So I carried those into my adult life, and it just destroyed a lot of relationships and, really kept me from being able to experience amazing things in this world. Even though I've done okay, I look back and go, my God, if I could have just figured this out a little bit sooner and chose, good, healthy, people to kind of mimic after, if you will, learn how to kind of grow from somebody big, maybe read more books when I was younger. I feel like back then we didn't have as many access to the books and some of the knowledge that people have today. The podcasts that are out there like yours, great resource to learn and grow and figure things out. There's so many things that you can do now to start to really question and get some answers and start to think of yourself and what are you doing? How are you showing up? And really begin to think about your emotions and your thoughts and the things that are happening to you so that you can start to say, okay, wait a second. I want to change this. I want to be a leader. I don't want to be a man that goes through life destroying other people. I want to be a leader in my community. I want to lead my family. And if I can't do that if I'm really not in tune with who I am as a man and know how to really be a true man. It's just you're floating through. And to be honest with you, you're just leaving more carnage than you are, blessings. And probably if I didn't change the trajectory of the way things were going for me, I don't know. Maybe I would have looked back and passed away. Nobody would have even cared, right? Who knows? That's not the legacy I want to leave. I want to leave something where people remember me and say, man, that was a guy that touched my life in a way that was different. And I learned a lot from that guy. And so that's my hope, is that I can be that kind of guy. But it takes a lot of self-reflection. It takes a lot of willingness to humble yourself and be willing to do things differently than probably what you've learned, especially if you came through some really dysfunctional stuff. But it's not easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was raised by 2 firstborn people. I'm the firstborn. I'm the oldest of all 16 cousins, and all the things that you would expect go with that. But my childhood was good overall. My parents were there. They would hug me. They were involved. And when I look at as my marriage fell apart back in 2021, and she left. She moved to California. I have almost full custody of the kids. That's changing, which is good for them. I didn't expect to have an abandonment wound in my life, and so it's interesting to notice that now with my partner Claire, to realize when that pops up and to say, this isn't necessarily Claire's issue. My therapist has really worked with me on what's similar and what's different, and it's like, it's almost always different, the thing that feels so similar, actually it's not. There's very few similarities there. And for us to even just be able to talk through, recently we kind of made up this exercise where I just thought, okay, we each have probably something in our head that is like our number one thing. Like if I got that, then the rest of the relationship would feel easier. And so I said, I'm going to just take my journal and I'm going to just ask you about what your number one thing is. It may take time for you to talk through it or to meander or brainstorm. And then I'll summarize back what I hear, and that might trigger other things. So a lot of that validation and reflection. And it's been we're like a week into this, but it's been such a helpful thing to just be like, how am I doing on the number one? How am I doing in helping you feel that I'm taking care of you? I'm gentle. I'm like this person that you can see a future with, like just to be able to like say like, what's the number one? And then, for her to do the same. To me, sometimes we think there has to be all these elements to make a great relationship. But a lot of times there's these like symbols that each person brings from their trauma and their attachment, or their lack of attachment or their abandonment, that mean more than other things. And I think when couples can start to just think through like what actually is important to me. For some people, it's economic security. For other people, it's physical touch. For other people, it's just time together where the kids aren't interrupting. And those have like different scales. Like I don't need gifts from someone as much as maybe I, need physical touch, or maybe, all those kind of different ways that are like love languages. When you think about how people can think through connecting more or connecting differently with their partners, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great what you're doing there, Joe. I think it's really just understanding first, what do I truly need? Like for me, I'm like you, I like a lot of touch. Like I love some affection, right? And so one of the things my wife does with me now is she'll snuggle with me in the morning. When we wake up first thing, before we even get out of bed, a lot of times she'll just put her arms around me for 20 minutes before we get up. That is a huge difference for me. It just makes me feel great to start the day, right? That's something I need very much. My wife is hyper independent sometimes. And so a lot of times I love to help. I'm a helper. That's just my nature. Sometimes I have to fight myself not to help too much and really give her the space to be what she needs to do and really, let her go and not try to help too much, right? And give her that space where she can feel comfortable saying, hey, you know what, I've got this and it's okay. But she also knows that if she does need help, she can reach out and she can, obviously ask me anytime. But if she doesn't ask me, then I don't always feel like I should just jump in and do that. And so learning these little tricks, like those little things just really start to add up and pay dividends and stuff. And learning, how to communicate that. And that's the thing, if your spouse says, hey, you know what, I really feel great when you bring me a gift. It makes me feel special. Okay, well now knowing that, I'm going to maybe try to bring that little gift here and there and surprise her with little things that kind of make her happy. Even if it's just a little bag of cookies or something, right? It could just be something small, but I think that's the key is just number one, knowing what our needs are and then being able to communicate that safely with our spouse so that they know what we're looking for. And then that spouse loving us back wants to meet that need a little bit. We're going to see that movement a little bit where they're going to kind of try to meet that need. And now we know we've got something great going on here because we're communicating our needs. We're getting our needs met. That person's meeting our needs. We're helping to meet theirs a little bit. And it's just a nice cohesive relationship that works, and there isn't this animosity where nobody's listening to each other. Nobody's getting their needs met. We just get frustrated and all of a sudden we're just like, okay, this doesn't work anymore. We're looking for a new spouse. It's usually not the new spouse. It's usually just the fact that we haven't figured out how to do these things and we just take a lot of our brokenness into the next relationship. So we've really got to fix ourselves and make sure that we're showing up properly before we, I think, give up on kind of what we have maybe going forward right now, fix it first.
Yeah. That idea of, any divorce or leaving of a relationship is going to shake you up and make you look at your stuff. And you can choose to look at that stuff or you can choose to drown it in however you choose to drown it. And those next relationships, it's going to be only as good as things that you've already worked on. It's interesting, as you say that, just yesterday I finished working on a new book called Dating After Betrayal. I'm not sure if it'll be out by the time that this episode goes live. But those of you listening, that's going to be out sometime in the next month or so. So keep your eyes out for that too. Awesome. So, Bryan, the last question I always ask is, if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
Oh man, I'd want to say thank you, for the work that you guys do. And I think there's, a lot of times, I think as a coach, I'm not a, mental health expert here per se, but as a coach, even a lot of times we get frustrated, and sometimes we wonder if the work we're doing is really making a difference. And so, but you get that one person, you get that one situation where, you change that person's life, and there's nothing better in the world, and that you were a vehicle to help move that along a little bit. That's what you got to remember. Remember all the good ones that are going to be there to say, thank you so much for the work you did. And you changed my life. And so just keep plugging away, keep learning, keep figuring more stuff out, and be open to, whatever program you're doing now. Like, I just think there's so many other possibilities that you can add to your practice that could potentially make you even better, right? And continue to grow, and just continue to put it out there so that we can help more people. There's a real mental health issue in the world today. And I think we've got to do a good job of really getting out there and trying to see if we can help as many people as possible. So it's important work. That's all I know. Keep going.
So awesome. Bryan, if people want to follow your work, where should we send them?
You can go to my website at myrelationshipfail.com. Okay. And you can join you can actually take the attachment quiz there, learn your attachment style. And I always challenge everybody to actually join the personal development school, which is Tice Gibson's school, through my website. If you do that, you're going to get a really treasure trove of information, really great healing stuff that you can start to delve into. And then I'm happy to give you a free session. I'd love to chat with you. I want to hear your story. I want to see if I can help point you in the right direction and see if we can get you moving the needle so that you can have a great relationship and begin to really turn this thing around and have a great life, and stop going through these, really difficult relationships and having all these breakups that really kind of hurt too much. There's nothing worse than, having losing the person you love, right? Because you don't have the tools necessary to keep them. And so let's get you some tools that you can utilize and have some great relationships.
So awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Joe, thanks so much. It's been an honor.
Such great tips today on the show. I know I've got a bunch of notes, and just kind of thinking through just how am I thinking about my attachment style? How am I thinking about my own trauma or abandonment wounds? It's just a great reminder that whether it's as therapists or consultants or just as humans, how are we continuing to improve ourselves and to think differently about ourselves? Just a reminder, I know at the top of the show we talked about it. We do have some openings for consulting. Make sure you apply quickly. Those are filling up. practiceofthepractice.com/apply. Also, we couldn't do the show without our amazing sponsors. Headway is our sponsor today. They help you with faster credentialing, higher per session rates, and payments every other week that your team can count on. You can have your best group practice with Headway, trusted by thousands of group practice owners. If you want to get started, head on over to join.headway.co/Joe. That's join.headway.co. That's co/Joe. Thank you for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.